welcome Laurence. So what I think is really cool, Randy, I don't know if you heard him talking, he was just saying how you guys are kind of all working together in the community to make sure that you guys are all filling all the holes and all the needs for our homeless community. Can you talk a little bit about Metro and what you guys do?
Sure. Metro's existed for about 10 years. At our heart, we're a church, but we're pretty unusual in that we're very actively involved in the vulnerable population, caring for them, being involved in their lives, getting involved in creating social enterprise businesses, opportunities for employment, and participating along with other social agencies in helping find collaborative solutions to the bigger systemic issue, and making sure that people's dignity and their individual worth is not forgotten in that bigger picture.
And how do you do that?
There's a number of ways. I think relationship is the key one. We've sort of tried very hard to build relationship with people over a long period of time. I think so often we kind of create these metrics that we attempt to sort of evaluate success based on if the certain ingredients are in place and, you know, for example, somebody's housed, there's a couple of support structures around them. Now, why aren't they recovering? Why have they not kicked their habit? Why have they not reintegrated into society properly? And the reality is that each of us as human beings have this deep desire to belong. And we need a place to belong. And so we are a community first and foremost at Metro, and we love partnering with others, but at our heart, our values drive us. And those values are making sure that people discover their God-given worth and dignity. And that journey is a long journey. It's not something that takes place in 1 year. You have to be prepared to walk alongside people for a decade, 2, 3 decades.
So one guest that I had a couple of years ago was actually a psychiatrist who ended up on the streets of East Vancouver. And what he said was, I just needed someone to believe in me.
Sure.
And just that alone was enough for him to get back on the road to recovery and get his life back.
I think for each person, there's a deep desire for relationship and a desire to, with their brokenness, be accepted and loved. And that takes all sorts of forms. You know, you don't want to enable, you want to give people resilience and the capacity to succeed. And those things can't be done by one organization. So if you start to have a shared set of values within a whole network of organizations, then you can actually hold those vulnerable people at the center and really empower them and continue to pour into them over time. And yeah, they may not ever have their earthly family to rely on, and that's always going to be a painful scar. But I think if you can create networks of support and a place where they can belong, and we often joke that Metro is kind of like Cheers, if you remember Cheers from way back, it's a place where everyone knows your name. And so we've actually seen a lot of people, now that we're seeing more and more people get housed through that sort of housing first strategy, you know, we're actually seeing a lot of people come back into our drop-in center, into our coffee shop, into our social enterprises, and on Sundays into our gatherings, because they're saying, you know what, I may be housed, but I actually need community. I need relationship, because I don't have a family I can turn to now, and that's powerful, and it makes a big difference.
A couple of things that I really like what you guys do is your Sunday services. You guys have you know, a breakfast in the morning, and so people from the community can come just for the breakfast, or they can come for your service. And then you also have the coffee shop that's also run by people in the community. So it's giving that community a sense of purpose and dignity and responsibility within your collaborative kind of situation.
Yeah. I mean, I think, again, you know, we partner with other organizations like the Gospel Mission. We make sure we're not duplicating resources. We're not, you know, wasting resources that are precious. And I think, you know, we just had a massive community banquet. We call it a February feast. I heard you mention earlier that, you know, there's all these resources that get poured into the community around Christmas, and then we call this period of time in January, February, the doldrums. Everyone forgets about those who are vulnerable. They feel like they've done their part. So we thought, what if we did a massive banquet in February, so people could just remember that they're valuable and worthy of being celebrated. And we had almost 350 people at this banquet, and we partnered with the Gospel Mission with the food, and we had you know, tons of volunteers, and we had a DJ for a dance, and we had musicians, and we had a First Nations dancer come in, and incredible presentation. And again, you know, a lot of the volunteers were people who used to be homeless or experience homelessness and be on the street, it was incredibly dignifying for them to welcome others in and say, hey, you know, it was like a big family reunion, because a lot of those people have been housed but in scattered sites, and so now they're seeing each other again for the first time in a long time. And so those are really powerful moments, and we try and create those moments so that people can reconnect and find community. And on a Sunday morning, breakfast is like that. You know, we don't want to bait and switch. We don't want people coming to church because they have to. Right. We want them to come and find fellowship and belonging because they want to. So you can come and have breakfast. You don't have to stick around for a service. If you don't want to stay, have breakfast and leave. But we'd love you to stick around and make friends and start to belong. And the same thing with our drop-in space, you know. There's never any agenda to try and force people into a place of believing one thing or another, but we do want to empower each person, and we want everyone to leave with this deep, sort of ingrained sense of their own worth and dignity.
What I really like about your church, because churches get kind of a bad rap, and one thing that's really, in our whole show, it's real, raw, relatable, and walking into your church, it's all those three things. I remember going in there and there was, I think a dog peed on the floor, and then there was another woman yelling at a woman. It was just, but everybody was accepted, and it was one of the most real churches. It doesn't matter who you are, where you are in your journey. Everybody seems very welcome at your church, and there's something that you guys say in the beginning of each service.
Yeah, I mean, we have a community kind of prayer, like a liturgy that we say, and we talk about just that, you know, that essence of what you've described. Thanks for selling it so well for us, by the way. And you know, the fact that there are people, there are people from all walks of life there.
Yeah.
You can go into the bathrooms, and there might be some girls who are engaged in, you know, in the sex trade, who've come off the streets the night before, and they're just kind of cleaning themselves up, but they know it's a safe place to be, and that they're loved there and they're accepted. And you have lawyers and doctors and politicians and business people and you know, middle class folks who have families. There's children running around. Yeah. People allowed to bring their pets in, you know.
And no judgment.
And there's no judgment. And so we always say that we are a group of people who pursue God in an atmosphere of love where judgment's left at the door. And that is like this powerful statement that actually wasn't something I came up with. Mm-hmm. That was somebody who was on the street. You know, he observed that was the kind of value, that was the atmosphere of the place, and he outlined it, and I thought that was brilliant. So we wrote it down, and it became our mission statement.
Well, it's so powerful because there is that belief that anyone that is religious doesn't like certain populations, and you know, I found your church and how you do it is very welcoming.
Yeah, I wouldn't say, and I think the classic kind of comment we would make, and it sounds a little cliche, but we don't really think we're that religious. We're passionately engaged in following Jesus, but we believe deeply that the way of the kingdom of God is about relationship, mm-hmm. and that each person has this incredible value. And so, you know, we want to live by values. And so I think, again, when it comes to our drop-in center or anywhere else, when we say, hey, you know, this is our set of values, people's behavior gets modified because it's not a set of rules that are imposed by those who have power on those who don't have power. Mm-hmm. But instead, it's a set of values that everyone can embrace. So if your behavior is not in accordance with those values, you're essentially a walking contradiction in yourself. And you have to evaluate that. And so it's in many ways, it's a sort of self-regulation. And over the last decade, we've seen people do all sorts of things that they would never do anywhere else in terms of taking ownership and taking pride in the space and making choices that perhaps they would never normally make because they've truly started to believe in themselves.
Well, that's one thing I remember actually was you had a garden in one of the downtown metro. Yeah. And how people were taking pride in it, and that if people were messing with the area, it was kind of like a family.
Right, and we're developing another courtyard space at the moment with a greenhouse and planters and stuff like that. We want it to be this oasis in the middle of a downtown, you know, which is so typified by concrete and development, which is all good for a city, but we need these little green spaces of peace and these havens. And so I expect and fully anticipate that will also become one of those places that, you know, those who perhaps don't have a garden of their own can take a sense of ownership and grow vegetables and have that dignifying experience of, you know, oh man, I grew these tomatoes and now I get to make some food with those tomatoes and feed someone else with those tomatoes. And that's a powerful thing.
Mm-hmm. So clearly you guys are doing your part to help the homeless community and the people that are struggling in our community. How can we as citizens, not just here in Kelowna, but across Canada, better serve that population?
Well, I think there is always a number of events that happen, and I think if you can jump on board with something, that raises awareness throughout the country, in your own neighborhood, in your own city, in your own locale, I think that's always powerful. I think when you do that, you start to erode stigmas that people have. I think that common misconception, which Randy alluded to before, is that people tend to forget that every single person has a story, and that each story is powerful. But for the grace of God go I, in the sense that it could be me. I mean, there's lots of people who we've encountered at street level who have stories that would boggle your mind in terms of how normal they seem, in terms of how they started off, and then one or two decisions or circumstances forced them down a path that just radically upturned their life in a horrible way. So there are all sorts of fascinating people that we come across and build relationship with. So yeah, let's erode stigmas. Let's get out there and show our support for organizations that do collaborate and use their resources well, and make a difference with those who are experiencing mental health issues or homelessness or addiction. There's events like Coldest Night of the Year that happens across the country. I know the Gospel Mission are doing strides to end homelessness as well. There are all these things that, frankly, even if you don't raise a ton of money, if you can affect 5, 10, 15 people that you know and change their attitude about the human story at play, then you've done your part. And I think that's powerful.
Well, and money talks, and so we have the Kelowna Food Bank coming up after this. And one thing is lots of people say, "Oh, well, don't give homeless people money; they're just going to buy drugs." And that's completely up to you if you want to give people money on the streets. But if we have resources like both, the Gospel Mission and Metro and the Kelowna Food Bank, giving money to those organizations, because you guys know how to best serve the population. So how do people?
Do you want to answer that?
Give you all their money.
Well, yeah, give us a call, I guess, yeah. And get to know what we do and find something that relates to your passion. So, if it's the community, if it's feeding the homeless, if it's helping the people that can't afford their groceries through the food bank, find something that moves your heart and then get involved in it. And I would add too, not just your money, but if you go down and volunteer, take a tour of these places and be exposed to the people that we're serving, all of a sudden it takes that fear and that strangeness away, and you start to identify, and it really helps you as a community.
Yeah, if you can spend time listening to someone, it will radically change your perception. I think one of the most dignifying things you can do is listen to someone's story. And then you find yourself relating to that story. And then you realize, actually, I could be in your shoes. And all of a sudden, as you say, that stigma erodes and you're able to relate in a powerful way. And so, yeah, absolutely. Don't just give from afar. Get involved. Go down. Get to know people. And expose your children to that as well. Let's make sure our next generation are not burdened by the same stigmas that our generation have been. Let's change our society that way.
Well, thank you guys for everything that you do. After the break, we're going to be having Tammy Williams from the Central Okanagan Food Bank talking about how we can better feed the community and people who maybe are struggling a little bit.